Hello, this is an extra to the main No Script podcast. As part of the podcast, we are live designing and developing the show's website. This is so that as the show progresses, we can highlight the huge number of quite significant advances that have been coming to the web platform recently, mostly with CSS and HTML. And ahead of the episode that we will be doing on web typography, where we'll have a lot to cover, I thought it might be helpful to do a quick walkthrough of the responsive typography that has already been set up on the site. And hopefully you can see it here. Here is the desktop view. But if we look at other devices, we can see that the type scales quite nicely. As with much of the podcast presently, we are learning to move to a more flexible intrinsic web design approach. I always hated having to set font sizes for different devices with media queries. It got ever more time consuming and ineffective as the range of devices available just grew, and adding more breakpoints, as most page builders did for a while, only made the sites harder to change, more bloated, and still it's unable to serve future users. But fortunately, CSS has given us a great function called clamp, where we can hand over all the hard work to the browser. So what we do with this is we just need to set up our parameters on our font size and clamp between them. So we set up the minimum size that we want our font to be and the maximum, and then in the middle value we set with the viewport width and let the browser just calculate what the user is going to need. Now, as I'm going to show you, this is probably not the ideal way to set things up, but we don't really even need to understand this or write this ourselves, because there are great tools for free online that will create us custom properties or variables that we can use in our CSS. And the one that I like the most is Utopia. I've tried a few. Let me give a quick shout out to the brilliant creators of this. They are James Gilead and Tris Mudford, and I think James does typography and layout as his speciality, and Tris does a lot of the front end stuff that makes this work. They are supported by Clearleft, which is an agency in the UK which has been around forever. It's probably best known for its co-founder, who's Jeremy Keith, who's an excellent speaker and writer of books on the web, and we'll be talking about him a lot in the podcast. Let me go back to Utopia. And there are other reasons why I like this. The other is that I can also, with the same tool, set up responsive spacing with this, and grid I haven't even looked at properly. But I'm using it presently, and with the same calculator, I can just move over to the tab on here and then use that in my designs and add it to my margins and my padding. And also that it's updated, which other tools I've seen haven't been in quite the same way. So once we put in, and I'll cover this in a moment, the stuff that we need to do here, then it will generate us a whole bunch of variables here that we can use in our designs as steps. And as we can see here, with the clamp values, we've got the minimum on this one and the maximum over here, but it's different to the MDN because that had viewport width only in it. And now this has been changed, I think just in the last week, to viewport I, which is the inline size of the viewport, which is probably more accurate. And it also includes an actual value in the middle as well, because that stops an accessibility problem if people zoom their browsers. So this is nicely done. It's also adding container queries, so it's got the units that we'll need for that. We'll be talking about that later in the podcast. And I believe also in the pipeline is a generator for WordPress users that will generate JSON with that. So I think it's a great tool. Let me go back to the top and explain how to use it. So what we need to do here is set up with some defaults. These are the ones I'm actually using at the moment. And it defaults to the width in pixels there of 320. I actually deal with rems for everything, and this generates rems. I even do the media queries with rems. But that's probably all that I'll need as the width size that we're supporting. And then on the other side, on the max viewport, we need to get the size of our wrapper or our container where all our content is held. And then we set our font size at small and our font size at big. And then we need to pick our type scale. So these are kind of like musical notes. It gives us some way of organizing the size of things so they look attractive and they are consistent across our designs. So we might want to set them differently for our minimal viewports, probably a smaller one than we'll want for our maximum viewports, just because of the way we engage with the screen. On the desktop, we can deal with large font sizes. When we're closer to our mobiles, chances are that we'll want something smaller to cram in. So we have different type scales on this ones, and they are, literally like musical scales on this. Now, there is a way of seeing how things respond here, because you can just scale up this and it will adjust this so we can see how these are responding. But James actually uses a tool which I now use to get an idea of the scales, and that is the typescale.com site, which gives you this kind of landing page. So you can see how things will respond on something that looks like an actual site, and you can also use a blog post as well for your display here. And you can set the different scales here. So I think I'm using the perfect font for the large devices for mine on there, so it gets pretty massive. And this is how the font scale after that. But as you can see, if I set that for my mobile, it's not going to look nice. So what I did is I went to a minor third, and that kind of scaled nicely. So this is a great tool to add in as well. But that's what I've set up over here. You can add in some extra things to your scale here. I'm not somebody who knows about typography, so I'm going to stick to what's there. I think, with music, it's better to learn some scales before you go out in public and start doing free-form jazz. And that's it, really. That's all we need to do. Now you can copy the whole thing and put it in your CSS, and it gives you this link, which is quite useful, because no way through this can you see what scales that you've been using. But in this case, because I've got other things in my root, I will just copy this, and it's already there. So I'll just bring up my code editor, which is VS Code. And this is where I've got my type, and I just go and paste this in. And then the only other job I need to do then is to link these custom properties or variables with the actual elements. So I'll go down to my header 1 and give that a variable with a step of 4 on this one. It starts at 5 by default. The header 2 gets 3, header 3 gets 2. And my paragraphs usually get the step 0. And for my small text here, I can go -1. And that's pretty much all I need to do. So at any point, if I want to change the sizes of these or the scales that I'm using, I can just copy and paste these in because they're already set here. So we want to make sure that everything is accessible. So on a page like this, where I've got header 1, which is episodes here, the next thing that needs to occur is a header 2 if I'm having any headers. And now normally that would probably be like a header 3 and that sort of size. But I've had to make an exception here, and it's pretty easy to do that. If I go over to my exceptions here, on my episodes page and my resources page, the header 2s have been set to step 1 on that. And that's pretty much all I needed to cover here. There is one more thing that's related to responsive, and that is these new text wrap that we've got, Pretty and Balance. And what they do, and you can see it's not working, I've got it on my strap line. The strap line is actually, let's just go here, this. We've got a widow, and this corrects this. It's not working on this browser. But if you look here, we'll see that it's adjusted. And with the responsive, obviously we want to adjust, and it will do it. The browser will decide how to arrange things. Let me just go over to the MDN records here, and there they are. Now, balance is something that I think it depends on all the different browsers, and I think all of them are supporting this now, but you can probably go up to 6 lines, so you'll just want it on your headers for this. And pretty is something which you can use on your paragraph text, but it slows things down. So I'm only using it in places where I think are important. On a regular blog post, I'm going to decide that's not important. If there's widows, so be it. I'm only going to concentrate on the things where people see it a lot, or if it just needs to be more pretty. So we can use that. The support isn't there across all the browsers for this. It will come soon, but it doesn't matter. It's a progressive enhancement. And I think that's really all I wanted to cover. I'll come back next time and add some more to typography, because I haven't covered fonts, I haven't talked about list items, and particularly I want to talk about anchor text, because that's what makes the web work, and we want to make sure that we set those up properly. Okay, well, I hope to see you next time, and thanks for listening. Bye-bye.